Have you ever stopped to wonder if the very system designed to educate us might actually be the one that limits us the most? Picture this. You are born with a natural curiosity, an untamed hunger to explore, to question, to experience the world in its raw and vibrant form. But soon, you are placed in a room, seated at a desk, surrounded by walls, rules, schedules, and endless evaluations. Imagine spending over a decade in that environment, day after day, year after year. Now consider this possibility. Many of the thoughts you believe are your own, many of the dreams you abandoned, and much of the anxiety you carry may not actually belong to you. They may have been planted, shaped, and reinforced by an invisible machine that began operating the moment you were old enough to hold a pencil. What if I told you that by the end of this video, you would see the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, ways this machine works, and discover what it takes to step outside of it? The most powerful part of this discussion will come later, because it will not only reveal the deeper problem but also provide you with a key to reclaim your own mind. That is why I encourage you to stay until the end. But before we dive deeper, if you have a passion for psychology, philosophy, and uncovering the hidden layers of human behavior, make sure to subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and reflect on this with us. What has school been for you? Has it nurtured your potential, or has it constrained it? Your story matters because it could inspire someone else who is quietly wrestling with the very same question. So let us begin this journey with one difficult but necessary inquiry. What is the true purpose of school? On the surface, we are told that school is about education, about preparing us for life. But as Arthur Schopenhauer, the 19th century German philosopher, once observed, the greatest achievements of the human mind often occur in spite of formal education, not because of it. Schopenhauer saw schools as places of compliance rather than liberation. He argued that true knowledge emerges through reflection, through suffering, and through direct confrontation with life itself, not through memorizing lifeless facts for exams we forget a week later. Nietzsche was no friend of formal education either. To him, state schooling turned individuals into surplus beings. It did not strive for brilliance, but for mediocrity. And here lies one of the first wounds that school inflicts upon us. From an early age, it teaches us to fear standing out, to hide within sameness, to value obedience over originality, to chase gold stars and grades rather than truth. Think of what happens the moment a child steps into the system. They are taught to raise their hand before speaking, to ask permission for the most basic human needs, to sit still for hours regardless of what their body or mind is experiencing. This is not education, it is conditioning. The goal is not to nurture a unique individual, but to mold an obedient worker, a predictable consumer, a silent citizen. Ask yourself this: when did school ever teach you to deeply understand yourself, to honor your emotions, or to trust your intuition? Instead, we are trained to seek answers outside ourselves, to doubt our inner voice, to compare, to compete, and to conform. And this runs deeper than we realize. When children show curiosity or creativity that does not fit neatly into the curriculum, they are often labeled disruptive. A child who asks too many questions is treated as a problem. Yet Schopenhauer once warned us that talent hits a target others cannot reach, while genius hits a target others cannot even see. Schools, however, often punish those rare minds who perceive what others cannot, silencing visionaries in order to protect the safety of the average. The damage is not only intellectual but emotional. How many of us still carry the lingering sense of not being enough because of the grades we once received? How many still hesitate to speak up because a teacher embarrassed us in front of a classroom? How many stopped drawing, writing, singing, or dreaming because someone told us we were not good enough? School teaches us to tie our worth to achievement, to external validation. And when that validation does not come, we retreat inward. This is no accident. Friedrich Nietzsche believed that systems of control survive by cultivating weakness. He argued that society, including its educational structures, seeks to tame the wildness of the human spirit, to transform the individual into something predictable and manageable. In this light, school becomes less a place of excellence than a training ground for obedience. And that obedience rarely ends when the final bell rings. Once conditioned, we continue to seek approval from bosses, from institutions, even from the fleeting validation of likes on social media, rarely daring to question the very system itself. We become skilled at performing roles, yet remain fragile when it comes to knowing who we truly are beneath the mask. But here lies a deeper question. What if the anxiety, exhaustion, and existential confusion so many adults feel today are not personal failures, but symptoms of a childhood spent in a system that never taught us how to think, only what to think? This is why both Nietzsche and Schopenhauer emphasized solitude, self-reflection, and suffering as the true pathways to knowledge. They believed that only by breaking away from herd thinking can a person become genuinely free. Nietzsche, in particular, elevated the idea of the Übermensch, the one who transcends himself, who creates his own values, who breaks his own chains, and refuses to be shaped by systems that diminish him. Yet, the question remains, how do we do this? How do we undo years, sometimes decades, of programming? How do we begin to question the unquestionable? And perhaps most importantly, how do we reclaim our minds, not just intellectually, but spiritually, emotionally, and existentially? In what follows, we will explore how the school system was designed, not randomly and certainly not neutrally, but as a reflection of the demands of the industrial age, a time when human beings were treated less like conscious individuals and more like replaceable cogs in a machine. You will see how those historical roots continue to shape modern education, and why understanding that origin is the first step toward freeing yourself from it. We will also begin to imagine what real education might look like, as envisioned by philosophers, psychologists, and mystics who dared to think differently. But first, ask yourself, what parts of you were left behind in school? And is it time to reclaim them? Share your thoughts in the comments, and when you are ready, we will go further. Now imagine, for just a moment, that you are not a human being, but a product. A product shaped, packaged, and delivered into a society that values efficiency, productivity, and predictability above all else. Would your upbringing look any different? This is not a dystopian metaphor. It is the historical reality behind modern schooling. The system we know today was not born out of a desire to awaken minds or nurture souls. It emerged from the industrial age, when factories needed workers who were disciplined, punctual, and obedient. In other words, school was designed not to enlighten, but to produce. And if you look closely, you can still see the blueprint of the factory everywhere. Bells marking the shifts, uniforms, rows of desks, standardized tests, subjects divided like assembly lines, and students grouped not by passion or ability, but by age, as if growth were mechanical rather than organic. We were trained not to think deeply, but to follow instructions, not to create, but to copy. Think back to your own school years. How much of that time was spent memorizing instead of understanding, repeating instead of questioning, complying instead of exploring? Now ask yourself, what did that do to your mind? The true cost is not only what we were taught, but what we were never taught. Rarely did schools encourage emotional intelligence. Almost never did they nurture existential exploration. Instead of asking, who are you really? Or what do you love deeply enough to endure suffering for? We were told to choose a career path at 18, based on grades, prestige, or practicality. As Schopenhauer observed, the task is not to see what no one else has seen, but to think what no one else has thought about what everyone sees. Yet schools do not reward this kind of thinking. They reward obedience. And slowly, the flame dims. The child who once asked why hundreds of times a day begins to ask, "Is this going to be on the test?" This is the subtle destruction of the mind. And this destruction does not end with graduation. Students who survive the process often carry deep wounds into adulthood. Fear of failure, dependence on authority, discomfort with uncertainty. They may excel in their professions, yet feel spiritually hollow. They may chase achievement endlessly, yet wonder why fulfillment never comes. Why? Because the system never taught them how to live, only how to function. Nietzsche called this the death of authenticity. He believed that when we allow the values of society to overwrite our own, we become estranged from our true nature. We become actors in someone else's script. Both Nietzsche and Schopenhauer believed that life's deepest meaning cannot be handed to us. It must be created. And that creation begins with unlearning, with questioning, with stepping beyond the walls, both physical and mental, that have confined us. So what is real education? It is not the hoarding of disconnected facts, and it is not a race for grades. Real education is the art of learning how to think rather than what to think. It is the cultivation of an inner world that can hold nuance, contradiction, and wonder. It asks for the courage to explore ideas that unsettle us. Above all, it is a long devotion to knowing oneself. Carl Jung pointed to this when he taught that the great privilege of a life is to become your true self. But how can a person become anything authentic when a lifetime of shaping nudges them to become something else? In ancient Greece, paideia was not a bureaucracy. It was a sacred process for forming the soul that braided philosophy, poetry, music, ethics, and physical training into one way of life. The goal was not merely to produce a citizen, but to awaken a human being. Education meant guiding the soul from the dimness of ignorance toward light. Somewhere along the way we lost that vision, and the loss leaves a mark. A person who never questions their beliefs, who never wanders through the dark forests of doubt and self-reflection, is easier to frighten and easier to control. Without an inner compass, there are only outer scripts. This is why thinkers like Nietzsche urged a kind of inner rebellion, not for the thrill of chaos, but for the project of becoming real. He reminded us that a strong reason to live allows us to bear almost any burden. Finding that reason demands more than a transcript. It calls for a personal revolution that rearranges what we value, how we pay attention, and what we are willing to sacrifice for meaning. Pause and look back. Can you recall a time when your curiosity was punished, when your creativity drew ridicule, when you were told to sit down, be quiet, and follow directions, while something alive inside of you reached for air? Those moments do not pass without consequence. They carve the structure of the inner world. They teach us what is safe and what is not, what will be rewarded and what will be refused. Slowly, we absorb the lesson. Do not be too loud. Do not be too different. Do not stand out. And then one day we can no longer remember who we were before the conditioning began. But what if we could remember? What if we could return to the place where the flame was first lit, before it was smothered by habit and expectation? In the next part of this journey, we will begin to explore how such an awakening can unfold. We will draw from existential psychology, Eastern philosophy, and modern neuroscience to understand how to dismantle the mental architecture built by years of misguided schooling. You will see why discomfort is essential for growth, why solitude can become your greatest teacher, and why Nietzsche believed that suffering is not a curse but a doorway to strength. Before we continue, let me ask you this. If you were never graded, never compared, never told who you had to become, who would you be? Share your thoughts in the comments, because if you have ever felt that school taught you to be anyone except yourself, know that you are not alone. The journey of reclaiming your mind has already begun, and it begins with a radical but liberating truth. The pain you carry from school is not a personal failure. It is the outcome of a system designed to shape you, not to empower you. The good news is that what was built inside you can be dismantled, and what was buried can be remembered. To start, we must confront one of the greatest myths handed to us through formal education: the idea that discomfort should be avoided. From childhood, we were trained to chase certainty, to cling to familiar answers, to avoid failure at all costs. Mistakes were punished, and questions without quick resolutions were dismissed. We were taught to fear the unknown. Nietzsche saw things differently. For him, the discomfort of questioning, doubting, and suffering was not a flaw, it was the path itself. He reminded us that one must carry chaos within to give birth to a dancing star. That chaos, the confusion, the inner conflict, the burning questions without easy answers, is not a sign of weakness. It is the raw material of transformation. Yet schools train us to believe the opposite. They teach us that knowledge is tidy, linear, and fixed. But the kind of knowledge that awakens the soul is rarely neat. It is cyclical, messy, and unfinished. This is why so many leave school with degrees yet feel lost, because real education, self-education, cannot be given. It must be earned through solitude, reflection, and a courageous search. Carl Jung discovered in his exploration of the unconscious mind that the parts of ourselves we are told to repress, our wildness, our emotions, our individuality, do not disappear. They sink into the shadows and wait there, often in silence for decades. Jung called this the shadow, the unconscious dimension of the personality that the ego refuses to recognize. And that shadow is often formed in childhood, especially in systems like school, where only certain behaviors are rewarded while others are punished. So what happens when we live under these repressions, when we follow rules designed not to protect us but to control us? We become strangers to ourselves. We act without feeling. We perform without truly living. We forget the voice that once whispered to us about dreams and passions that had nothing to do with exams or job titles. To heal, Jung insisted, we must confront the shadow. We must bring into the light the very parts of ourselves we were trained to hide: the anger, the longing, the urge to break the rules and pursue something more profound. But this takes courage, because once you begin to peel away what school taught you, the world can look entirely different. You may realize that you were never meant to sit quietly for 8 hours a day, that your worth cannot be measured by a grade point average, that your intelligence may not lie in logic or mathematics but in emotion, intuition, creativity, or spirituality. And here lies the liberation. Once you reclaim this truth, no institution, no degree, no authority can take it from you again. So how do we begin? The first step is to embrace solitude. For both Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, solitude was not loneliness, it was liberation. It was the sacred space where one could finally hear one's own thoughts without the static of expectations. Schopenhauer often walked for hours alone, letting the chaos of the world settle. Nietzsche too believed that real clarity arrives only when we step away from the crowd. He warned that those who cannot command themselves will be commanded by others. That is the nature of living beings. To command yourself, you must first understand yourself. And to understand yourself, you sometimes need to step outside everything you have been taught. The second step is to engage in what Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychologist, called logotherapy, the pursuit of meaning. Frankl discovered that even in the darkest conditions, human beings could endure if they had a reason to live. This reason, your why, is not found in textbooks. It emerges through suffering, through your questions, through the deepest longings within you. It is forged not in the classroom, but in the fire of life itself. Now ask yourself, when was the last time you truly questioned what gives your life meaning? Not simply career ambitions or external goals, but what makes you feel alive. School never asked you that, but life always does, and it is you who must answer. The third step is to restore the broken link between mind and body, between intellect and intuition. Modern education elevates the intellect while neglecting the body, the heart, and the soul. We are taught to live in our heads, but human beings are not machines. We are complex, emotional, sensory creatures. Nietzsche, with all his brilliance, never divorced thought from the body. He saw the will to power not merely as domination, but as vitality, as the pulse of life itself. He urged us to live with intensity, to embrace the whole of experience, not just ideas, but also feelings, instincts, and desires. To reclaim your mind, you must also reclaim your body, your energy, your rhythm, and your passion. Begin to listen not only to the thoughts running through your head, but to what stirs your soul, to what excites you, to what drains you, and to what you once loved before you were told what you should love. And finally, you must give yourself permission. Permission to be wrong, to change your mind, to evolve, to walk away from a path that was never truly yours, and to begin again. Because the most dangerous lie school teaches us is that once you fall behind, it is too late. The truth is, it is never too late to return to yourself. In the final part of this video, we will uncover one of the most powerful realizations, a truth both Schopenhauer and Nietzsche pointed toward, but only you can fully recognize. It is the revelation that you are not only capable of escaping conditioning, but of becoming something entirely new. You can become the creator of your own values, your own education, your own life. You can choose meaning over safety, authenticity over approval, depth over speed. You can transform the wounds of your past into wisdom for your future. But to do so requires one last step, the hardest and most necessary step of all. So ask yourself right now, before we take the final step, what belief from school do you still carry that no longer serves you? And what would it take for you to finally let it go? The answer is closer than you think. You have already come a long way. You have looked directly at the machine that shaped your young mind. You have questioned the beliefs handed to you as truths. You have seen how obedience was rewarded, while curiosity, natural, vital, alive, was often met with silence or even ridicule. And now we arrive at the final and most powerful revelation. That revelation is this: you were never meant to fit into the system. You were meant to rise beyond it. Schopenhauer and Nietzsche both grasped something few are willing to face. Systems, by their very nature, cannot make you whole. They are built to regulate, to standardize, to confine. But you are not a standard. You are not a machine. You were not made merely to function. You were made to awaken.